Isn't it funny how life waits until you're at your most relaxed to rip the ground out from under you? Damian thought he'd found peace at the blue horizon, cocktails, sunsets, no responsibilities, until she appeared, Selena, the woman who had walked out of his life years ago. Only this time, she wasn't alone. A child ran at her side, laughter echoing across the sand, carrying a truth Damian wasn't ready to face. What happens when the one thing you never expected shows up? Looking at you with eyes similar to yours? Stay with us, because what began as a quiet escape became the moment a man discovered the piece of himself he thought was lost. Where in the world are you watching from tonight? Drop your city in the comments. Have you ever looked into someone's eyes and seen your own reflection staring back? Let us know below, and subscribe for more stories that speak to the moments we can't forget. The Caribbean sun leaned low in the sky, painting the horizon with streaks of orange and violet as Damian Cole stepped onto the terrace of the Blue Horizon Resort. To anyone watching, he looked like a man who belonged here. His tall frame was wrapped in a crisp white linen shirt, the sleeves casually rolled, a pair of tailored khaki trousers brushing his polished loafers. His sunglasses shielded more than his eyes. They hid exhaustion, the kind that no ocean view or cocktail could wash away. Around him, vacationers sipped rum punches, laughed too loudly, and let the tropical breeze lull them into forgetting the world they had left behind. But Damian had never been good at forgetting. He gripped the edge of his glass, the condensation wetting his fingers, and tried to let the soft crash of waves drown out the noise inside his head. Success had been his anchor for so long. Money, power, influence. But lately, it all felt like sand slipping between his hands. Coming here was supposed to be a reset, a rare attempt at rest for a man who never stopped moving. And yet rest was proving as elusive as peace. Then he saw her. At first, she was only a silhouette at the edge of the shore, a figure outlined by the glow of sunset. But as the light shifted, his chest tightened. He would have known that walk anywhere, the gentle sway of her hips, the deliberate calm of her steps as if the earth itself matched her rhythm. Selena, his ex-wife, the woman who had walked out of his life years ago, leaving behind only a silence that gnawed at him every time he tried to understand it. Her hair, once cropped close, now fell in soft curls that caught the wind. A sundress of pale yellow fluttered around her knees, its fabric brushing against skin the color of burnished cocoa. The sight of her was a blow and a balm all at once, stirring a mix of longing and anger he had buried under years of boardrooms and business trips. But then he noticed the child, small, maybe 6, 7 at most. A boy with curls dark as night and laughter that spilled into the wind like music. His little hand was wrapped firmly in hers, his feet kicking up sand as he bounded ahead before circling back to tug at her arm. Damian's gaze locked on him, his pulse quickening. There was something about the boy's face, wide hazel eyes that seemed to hold flecks of gold, a tilt of the mouth he recognized too well. The drink slipped in Damian's grip, nearly tumbling before he caught it. The laughter and chatter of the terrace dulled into background noise. For the first time in years, he felt unsteady. A vacation meant to be his escape had just become something else entirely, because standing there, radiant in the fading light, Selena Carter was no longer just his past. She was holding a future that looked hauntingly like his own. Damian's pulse hammered as he watched the boy dart toward the water's edge, chasing a foam-tipped wave before retreating with squeals of delight. Selena's laughter followed, light but restrained, as though she'd trained herself not to draw too much attention. She bent to smooth the child's hair, her movements instinctive, tender in a way Damian had never witnessed. The sight pulled at him with the force of an undertow. Selena Carter, the woman who had once matched him in fire and ambition, now looked softer, steadier, as though time had carved away the sharp edges he remembered. The boy turned back toward her, clutching a small seashell triumphantly in his hand. His smile lit up his entire face, and Damian's breath stalled. Those eyes. Hazel flecked with gold. He could have been staring into a mirror of his own childhood photographs. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, willing himself to look away, to dismiss the thought as a coincidence. But the resemblance clung stubbornly, refusing to release him. Selena caught him staring. For a fleeting second, her posture faltered, shoulders stiffening as her gaze locked onto his. The air between them stretched taut, silent recognition snapping like a hidden wire. Damian rose from his seat before he could think better of it. His legs carried him down the terrace steps, his polished shoes sinking into sand that seemed to burn hotter with every step. When he reached them, the boy had scampered off again, crouching near the tide pools. Selena straightened, her chin lifting in a gesture he knew well, defense disguised as elegance. Her dress rippled around her legs, her skin gleaming beneath the Caribbean sun, but her eyes were the same as the day she left him, guarded, resolute, unreadable. Selena, he said at last, the name scraping against his throat. Her lips parted, but no greeting came. Instead, her gaze flicked briefly to the boy, then back to Damian, her silence weighted with everything unsaid. "It's been a long time," he continued, though the words felt inadequate, trivial compared to the storm brewing inside him. Selena's expression softened for a moment before hardening again. Damian. Just his name, cool and clipped, like a door she wasn't sure she wanted to reopen. The boy jogged back toward her, proudly holding up his seashell. Damian knelt slightly to meet the child's eyes, his own heartbeat echoing in the sound of the surf. Up close, there was no denying it. The curve of the jaw, the flicker of curiosity, even the stubborn set of his small shoulders. Damian didn't need confirmation. The truth was already unraveling before him, as undeniable as the tide. The night air was warm, laced with the scent of grilled seafood and salt carried in from the sea. Lanterns swayed above the open-air restaurant, casting golden light across linen-draped tables and the low murmur of vacationers dining beneath the stars. Damian stood at the entrance longer than he should have, his chest tightening when he saw Selena already seated near the railing. She wasn't alone. The boy, Ethan, sat across from her, swinging his legs restlessly while fiddling with a fork that caught the candlelight. Damian approached, each step weighted with hesitation. Selena looked up first, her expression smooth, practiced, but her eyes gave her away. They widened, if only for a heartbeat, before narrowing back into composure. She gestured stiffly to the empty chair at her table. It was not an invitation so much as an acknowledgement of inevitability. He sat down, the scrape of the chair against stone louder than it should have been, and the air between them thickened instantly. "Damian," she said, her voice measured. "Selena," he replied, his eyes drifting to Ethan before he could stop himself. The boy's gaze met his, curious and unblinking. Up close, the resemblance struck harder. The shape of his nose, the tilt of his brow, each detail pressed into Damian like a signature he could not ignore. Ethan broke the silence first, pointing innocently at Damian. "You look like me." His tone was cheerful, without hesitation, the kind of truth only a child could voice. Selena's hand tightened around her napkin, the knuckles pale. Damian's throat worked as he forced a smile. "Maybe I do," he said softly, though the words carried the weight of everything unsaid. The boy turned back to his plate, satisfied with the answer, while Selena's eyes burned into Damian's. Her lips pressed into a thin line as if daring him to push further. But he didn't. Not yet. Instead, He watched Ethan pick at his food, marveling at how natural it felt, this simple act of sitting across from him. Selena finally broke the silence, her tone laced with steel. "This is not the time or the place." Damian leaned back, his jaw tightening, the restraint costing him more than anger would have. "Maybe not," he said, "but you can't expect me to pretend I don't see what's right in front of me." Selena didn't respond. She lifted her glass instead, her hand trembling slightly as she drank, her silence louder than any denial. And Damian knew in that moment the question burning in his chest could no longer be buried. The morning sun spilled across the resort like melted gold, slipping through palm fronds and dappling the terrace where breakfast was served. Damian sat at a distance, his untouched coffee cooling as his eyes remained fixed on the table across the courtyard. Selena was there, her hair swept into a simple knot, her yellow dress catching the light in a way that made her look almost untouchable. Across from her, Ethan's laughter rang out, bright and careless, as he crumbled a croissant into pieces and pretended to feed a sparrow darting near the railing. The sound lodged itself in Damian's chest, stirring memories he hadn't meant to summon. Selena in Harlem, the early days when they had nothing but each other and dreams that felt unstoppable. He could still see her in the cramped apartment kitchen, textbooks spread across the counter, her laughter mixing with the sizzle of onions in the pan. She had been fierce then, sharp-witted, ambitious, her eyes alive with the belief that she could change the world. And he had loved her fire, loved the way it pushed against his own hunger for more. But passion had a way of turning volatile. He remembered the late nights in the office, the arguments that always circled back to the same things, his absence, her exhaustion, the weight of being seen but never quite belonging in the spaces he thrived in. Their marriage had been a dance on glass, each step leaving fractures they chose not to acknowledge until the cracks finally broke them apart. One night, she was gone. Her side of the closet emptied, her textbooks vanished. The silence louder than any fight they'd ever had, and Damian, stubborn, proud, had never gone after her. Now here she was, years later, not only returned but with a child who bore his eyes and his smile. The questions twisted inside him like blades. Why hadn't she told him? Had she thought him unfit? Or worse, had she believed he wouldn't care? He clenched his jaw, his knuckles whitening around the coffee cup. Ethan's laughter rose again, and Damian's gaze softened despite himself. The boy leaned into Selena's side, whispering something that made her chuckle low in her throat. The sound achingly familiar. Damian's chest tightened until he had to look away. The truth loomed between them like the tide creeping in, unstoppable and demanding. He could no longer pretend. The boy was his, and the silence Selena had kept all these years was about to break. The waves hissed against the shore, dragging foam across the sand before retreating into the sea. Damian stood rigid, his shoes sinking slightly with each pull of the tide, but he hardly noticed. His eyes were locked on Selena, her figure gilded by the last rays of the sun, every line of her body caught between fight and flight. She didn't move closer, didn't flinch at his question, though the flicker in her eyes betrayed the storm beneath her composure. Ethan knelt a few yards away, humming to himself as he scooped sand into a crooked castle tower. The boy's laughter rose in little bursts, innocent and unaware, while his parents faced each other like adversaries, holding years of silence between them. Damian's voice, though even, trembled with something unfamiliar. "Don't play with me, Selena. You know what I'm asking." Her arms crossed, as if the gesture might shield her from the force of his demand. "And what would you do if I said yes?" she asked softly, her gaze darting briefly to Ethan before returning to Damian. "Would you sweep in with your money and your power? Would you claim him like a trophy? Or would you leave when the novelty wears off, the way you always did with us? The words sliced through him sharper than she intended, because they carried a truth he couldn't ignore. He had buried himself in deals, in skyscrapers and boardrooms, and when she needed him most, he hadn't been there. His silence then spoke louder than any promise he had made. Damian exhaled, dragging a hand across his jaw. "You robbed me of years," he said finally, his voice low, dangerous with grief. "Years I can't get back. Do you know what it feels like to see your child for the first time and realize he doesn't even know who you are?" Selena's face softened, the defiance dimming into something more fragile. Her lips parted, but no answer came. Instead, she let the truth settle between them, raw and unpolished. The sea breeze lifted the edge of her dress, the hem brushing her ankles like an echo. Ethan called out suddenly, holding up a shell he had found. "Mom, look!" His voice cracked through the tension, bright and eager. Selena turned toward him instinctively, her expression melting into warmth, then back to Damian with eyes rimmed in unshed tears. Her silence was its own admission. She didn't need to speak. Damian already knew. And in knowing, the ground beneath him shifted irrevocably, leaving him caught between fury and something even more dangerous. Hope. The cabana was dim, its gauzy curtains swaying with the evening breeze, carrying the faint scent of salt and hibiscus. Inside, the world seemed to shrink until it was only the two of them, the silence between their words louder than the murmur of the ocean. Selena sat across from Damian, her back straight but her hands folded tightly in her lap, as though she needed to anchor herself to keep from unraveling. Her eyes held his, unblinking, a flicker of fire and fear intermingled. "I couldn't stay," she said finally, her voice low but unwavering. "Every room we walked into, I was dissected. Every smile I gave, judged. Your colleagues, your friends, they saw me as a novelty at best, a trespasser at worst. And you told yourself you didn't notice. But I did. I noticed every whisper, every glance. Her words were measured. Not cruel, but each one landed heavy, like stones dropped into deep water." Damian leaned forward, his fists tightening on his knees. "You think I didn't hear them? You think I didn't care?" His jaw clenched, the veins at his temples standing out. "I thought we were stronger than their noise. I thought you knew that." Selena's laugh was brittle, breaking on the edges of her throat. "Stronger? Damian, I was drowning. And when I found out I was pregnant," her voice faltered, her eyes drifting toward the swaying curtain as though she could see Ethan's silhouette beyond it. "I knew what kind of world we'd be bringing him into. A world where a child with your name but my skin would be weighed, questioned, diminished before he could even speak for himself." The confession tightened something in Damian's chest until he could barely breathe. His fury simmered, not at her, but at the years stolen, the memories that had never been made. "So you left me in the dark?" His voice cracked, stripped of its usual authority. "You thought the answer was to disappear? To deny me my son?" Her eyes filled then, though no tears fell. "I thought the answer was to protect him, to give him peace, to give him me, unbroken instead of both of us shattered." Damian's breath shuddered as he pressed his palms against his thighs, his knuckles pale. He wanted to scream, to argue, to demand restitution for time lost. But beneath it all, he recognized something he hadn't expected. Her choice had not been born of betrayal. It had been born of love, a love so fierce it had forced her to sacrifice everything, even him. The curtain fluttered open with the sweep of a small hand, and Ethan bounded into the cabana, his bare feet dusted with sand, his cheeks still flushed from play. He clutched a seashell nearly as big as his palm, its ridges glinting faintly under the lantern light. Without hesitation, he walked straight to Damian and held it out as though it were treasure meant only for him. "Here," Ethan said, his voice bright, certain. "You should keep it." Damian blinked, caught off guard. His hand moved almost automatically, large fingers curling around the delicate shell. The boy's eyes, those unmistakable hazel eyes flecked with gold, studied his face with an intensity that made Damian's breath catch. And then, as casually as a child could, Ethan tilted his head and said, "You look like me." The words hung in the air, innocent yet shattering. Damian's chest tightened, his throat constricting as though every defense he had ever built had been stripped away in an instant. No paternity test, no lawyer's letter, no carefully crafted explanation could speak louder than that simple truth. In Ethan's eyes, in his voice, Damian saw confirmation. He felt recognition. He felt something he hadn't realized he was starving for. Selena rose from her seat, her posture tense, her hands twisting together. She looked between them, her face a battlefield of emotions. Fear that the world she had built was unraveling, relief that the secret was finally no longer hers alone to carry. Her lips parted as if to intervene, but she stopped herself. For once, she let the moment belong to them. Damian lowered himself to Ethan's level, his knees pressing into the woven rug beneath them. The boy grinned, as if the resemblance he'd pointed out was an amusing game. Damian's voice trembled when he finally spoke. "Maybe I do," he said, forcing a smile that faltered under the weight of everything swelling inside him. His hand, hesitant but drawn by instinct, lifted and brushed lightly against Ethan's curls. The boy leaned into the touch without hesitation, without suspicion, as though his heart had recognized something long before the adults around him dared to admit it. Damian's vision blurred at the edges, and he blinked hard, swallowing down the surge of emotion rising fast and unyielding. For the first time in years, Damian felt stripped of his armor, his power, his control, his carefully measured life. None of it mattered here, in this small cabana, holding a seashell and looking into the face of the child he never knew he had. The beach was quiet now, long after the resort lights had dimmed and the last of the music had faded into memory. The sky stretched above them in endless velvet, stars scattered like secrets across its expanse. Damian walked slowly along the sand, Ethan's small hand tucked firmly into his own. Each step left an imprint that the waves reached for, but never quite erased, as if the ocean itself understood the weight of the moment. Selena trailed a few paces behind, her arms wrapped loosely around herself. She watched them, her eyes reflecting both wonder and hesitation, as though she wasn't sure whether to step forward or retreat. For years, she had carried this burden alone, raising Ethan in quiet corners of the world, shielding him from the storm she feared would engulf them both. Now, seeing Damian with him, she couldn't decide if the sight healed her or hurt her. Damian stopped at a driftwood log half buried in the sand. He crouched, pulling Ethan gently to face him, and the boy's wide eyes blinked up at him with curiosity. Damian's throat tightened, but this time he didn't push the words down. "Ethan," he said softly, the name foreign and yet already etched into his soul. "I can't promise you the biggest house or the flashiest toys, but I can promise you this. I'll be here. I'll show up. Not just when it's easy, but when it's hard, too. You'll never wonder if you matter to me because you always will." The boy tilted his head, considering, before nodding solemnly, as though he understood more than a child his age should. He slipped the seashell he'd given earlier into Damian's palm once again, sealing the vow in silence. Selena approached then, her steps slow, measured. Damian looked up at her, the surf whispering around them, and for the first time there was no anger in his gaze. only resolve. "I'm not here to take control from you," he said, rising to his feet. "I've done enough of that in the past. But I want to stand beside you now, not as a husband, not as the man I was, but as Ethan's father, as your partner in raising him." Her breath caught, her lips parting, the defenses she had built for years slipping away. The waves crashed softly, carrying off the silence that had divided them for too long. Selena reached for Ethan's shoulder, steadying herself as much as her son. Damian extended his other hand, not demanding, only offering, and beneath the vast Caribbean sky, Selena placed her hand in his. For the first time in years, the three of them stood together, not as fragments of a broken past, but as the fragile beginning of a shared future. Damian looked up at the stars and realized this trip was never meant to be an escape. It was meant to bring him home. If this story moved you, share it. Someone out there has hidden a part of themselves, afraid of what the truth might bring, and they need to know they're not alone. Comment below if you've ever faced a moment when the past refused to stay buried but gave you the chance to rise stronger. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, drop a comment, and share it with a friend. And don't forget to subscribe to Black Stories Untold for more stories that uncover hidden struggles, celebrate strength, and remind us that every voice matters.